Hi, I can see some people are starting to join us. I'm Jan Masaoka. This is the CalNonprofits webinar on the California Small Business and Nonprofits Relief Grant Program. And I'm very happy to have you here today. And some of you, most of you have not yet applied for this program, while some of you may have been frustrated in earlier rounds and are going to try again. So all of us say we're still happy to help. And I want to say a word about why this program is so important and so why I'm so glad you guys are here today. So first of all, in the first set of funding, about 6,000 nonprofits got more than $78 million in funding. So that's a lot of nonprofits and a lot of money. And you think about other grant programs that have many fewer, much less dollars, and this is really an important one. They've just put in 1.5 billion, billion with a B, more money into this program, which means that there are a lot more opportunities to get even more money. And in particular, it's noteworthy that for the arts and culture nonprofits, they actually did not have enough qualified nonprofits to apply, so that millions of dollars were left in the fund unspent. So that gives you a sense that this is a program where you might have a much better chance, in terms of getting a grant from it than some of the programs where where hundreds of people apply and maybe only 3 or 4 people end up getting a grant. So those are reasons why this is an especially important one. So just to say a word about us at CalNonprofits, who's bringing you this webinar today for free. We're a statewide alliance of nonprofit organizations with more than about 10 members and 10,000 members, not 10. And one of the main things we do is to strengthen relationships between government and nonprofits. So that means strengthening nonprofit ability to get better regulations and funding. And it's also part of helping government understand nonprofits better. And before this program was actually launched, it wasn't possible for nonprofits to apply. And it was because of our advocacy, along with that of other nonprofits and our friends in the legislature, that nonprofits were made eligible for this program. Just to also let you know, in terms of our work supporting the nonprofit workforce, that more than 25,000 nonprofit staff in California get their health insurance through us. And our members also get discounts to HR resources, discounts to things like rental cars and things like that. So the other reason I want to say that this program is so important to us is because it prioritizes small organizations. It's only available to organizations with annual income of less than $2.5 million. It prioritizes organizations in rural areas, prioritizing organizations in traditionally marginalized communities, and it prioritizes programs and nonprofits that are led by people of color. So these are all reasons why this is a program that we think is really important for nonprofit organizations. Okay, but just to remind you that we are an outreach partner to this program, and it's one of the reasons why it's important is because we hope that you will use CalNonprofits as your portal partner. You don't have to. You can certainly use everyone, and anyone. We help everybody who comes to us, whether they're using our portal or not. But using our portal, we think, helps CalOSBA, the California Office of the Small Business Advocate, see the power of nonprofit networks. Okay, next slide. I want to thank in advance our 2 speakers, Sue Siegler, who's our program manager for this and probably the world expert on the community's California Small Business Grants Program for nonprofits. Lucy is our public policy director, and she and Sue are going to be kind of doing a tag team in terms of Sue's presentations and Lucy asking the questions that you've already submitted, as well as monitoring the questions that are coming in live. And just another word about our policy work, which Lucy leads. It includes bringing, filing amicus briefs with the Supreme Court and other courts, sponsoring and supporting and opposing legislation. So I hope that all of you will be more aware of her and her work and CalNonprofits work as a result of this. You will receive the recording by email, so you don't have to take screenshots or take notes or worry about that. And we'll start these numbers again later. Okay, and now I think it's time for the poll. Yes, so we have 2 questions to understand a little bit more about you. So here's the 2 questions. The first one is very simple. Tell us your application status. Like, have you applied yet? Did you start an application but haven't finished it? Did you fill out the wrong application earlier? Are you on the wait list now? Or my application was selected, but it's still in process and I haven't heard yet. So let us know what your application status is. That'll help Sue and Lucy be the clearest in terms of what kinds of questions are the most important. And the second poll question is, what kind of help from CalNonprofits are you most likely to use? And you can choose all that apply, and you can see that we're planning to have additional webinars, detailed written FAQs. Sue is available by phone, as are other staff, and individual help walking you through the application. So we want to understand what's the best way for you to access our kind of help. So that's great. Oh, wow, almost 80% have not applied yet. Wow, that's great. Okay, so relatively speaking, there's a few amounts of people that started applications or filled out the wrong application. So that's great to see. We have so many new applicants here. And because the application process is so much improved from previous rounds, so if you're a new applicant, be happy that you didn't experience what that was like, right? And it looks like, oh, actually, all of these things are things that people would find useful: webinars, FAQs, phone support, and help walking through the application. So thanks, everybody. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue and to Lucy for our presentations.
Thank you, Jan, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're glad that you're here with us today, and we're going to tell you everything that you need to know in order to get your application in, and also for those who have already applied, there's frequently a lot of questions. So let's start out with reminding everybody that there are, unfortunately, some fraudsters and scammers out there, and so you should pay nothing to be able to apply to this program. It is completely free. And the communications that you'll receive once you've started an application will come from lendistry.com. And Lendistry's website is at careliefgrant.com. So those are just some tips to help you avoid interacting with anybody who might not be legitimate. We're going to start out this morning by talking a little bit for people who already have an application in the system and answering some questions there. And then we'll go on to information for new applicants. But stay with us, because the information for current applicants will be relevant for those of you once you file an application. And I'd also like to mention that we have FAQs on our website, frequently asked questions and application guide, and everything that we're covering today is contained there. So if you need to review, that's quick and easy by going to CalNonprofits.org and taking a look at our FAQs. Next slide, please. We are right now in the looking at the last 3 funding rounds that we anticipate that will be part of the California Relief Grant Program. And you can see, as Jan mentioned, that there's over $1.5 billion available. And let's review those for just a moment. In round 7, that is for people who have already applied and are on the wait list. And so Lendistry is the company that was selected by the California Office of the Small Business Advocate to administer the program. And Lendistry tells me that they are selecting over 2,000 applicants a day off the wait list for processing their applications. Round 8 is currently open and accepting new applications, and that is for select arts and cultural organizations. If you would like to review your eligibility, please go to our FAQs. That's included in there. And round 8 is a little different because it does not have the same income cap. There is no income cap on that as there are for the other rounds, and we'll cover that more thoroughly in a moment as well. For nonprofits and small businesses who have not yet applied or who need to reapply for some reason, round 9 will be open September 9th through the 30th. And next slide, please. For current applicants who would like to know where they stand in the process, you can log back into your application at any time, and our FAQs contain instructions on how to do that if you're not quite sure. We'll also note that you can only receive 1 grant from this program, regardless of which round you applied in. So if you've already gotten your grant, congratulations. And and there's no need to file another application because it will not be approved. For people who are on the wait list, your waitlisted applications automatically roll over to the next funding round. So if your status is showing as on the wait list or awaiting selection, then you don't need to reapply, with one exception. That would be if you're applying in round 8 in the arts and cultural round, we do suggest that you also apply in round 9 because you may not receive your funding decision before round 9 closes, and we don't want you to lose that opportunity to apply in round 9. An insider's tip is if you do file more than one application, please use a different email address, a unique email address for each application that you file. Lendistry tracks applications by email address, and if they see it twice, they will flag it as a duplicate application and you risk being disqualified. So next slide, please. For those of you who log in to check your status, this is what you'll see for people who have already applied. And there's 2 important things to look at here. One is that message in red. You can see that this one currently says awaiting selection process, and we'll go over what that means in a moment. But also to look at the code in blue. If you see a code that says CRG, you have applied using the small business form. If you see CRG NPO, you have applied using the nonprofit application form. And if you see CRG AC NPO, that means that you applied in either round 4 or 8, excuse me, using the application for arts and cultural organizations. We emphasized logging in and checking your code if you applied way back in the beginning of the year in rounds 1 and 2. We did identify a fair number of people who used the small business instead of the nonprofit application or vice versa. And those applications cannot be processed by Lendistry. Lendistry does not take a look at your application until it is selected for processing. So it does not identify that issue. You have to do it yourself. And we want to make sure that anybody who might have used the wrong form for an earlier application has that opportunity to apply again in round 9. Next slide, please. I mentioned that you might see other status messages when you log into your application. It might say awaiting selection process or on the wait list. That means your application has been received. You do not need to reapply again unless, as I mentioned, you are around 4 or 8 applicant for arts and cultural organizations. That means that Lendistry has received your application, but it has not yet been processed. That term selected to Lendistry means not that you've yet been selected for funding, but that your application has been selected for processing. And as it moves through, you will see selected pending validations is what you'll see once your application has been selected for processing. And what that means is that they are verifying your information. After that, you'll see your status change to in closing and documents out. And what that means is that you should be watching your email for something from DocuSign. Lendistry will send you a grant agreement once you have signed and returned that. That is your final step before moving to funding. If you log in and see a message that says not selected, that means that your application was declined. In order to find out why, you need to contact Lendistry, and and their phone number is in our FAQs and on our website. And if you don't understand why you were declined, once you've learned the reason, please feel free to get in contact with me. I'm happy to go over that with you. Be sure that you're adding Lendistry to your safe senders so that you don't miss any emails. And if you did file more than one application and use more than one email address, be sure that you're checking all of those email boxes, because sometimes people miss their emails. Next slide, please. So I know that who should apply when can be a confusing question, so we're going to recap on that. Do you need to apply in round 9? You do not need to reapply if you've already applied and your status says on the wait list, or awaiting selection process, and you have verified that blue code and you know that you filed the proper form of application, either nonprofit organization or small business. You do need to apply or reapply in round 9. If you use the wrong application form in an earlier round, round 9 will be your last opportunity to reapply for funding. If you're a first-time applicant, of course. If you applied in round 4 for the arts and cultural organizations, that was the round that happened in the late spring, and you were not qualified in that round, you can reapply in round 8, and you can reapply in do not reapply in round 8 if you did not qualify for round 4, but go ahead and apply in round 9. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're applying for the first time in round 8 for the arts and cultural organizations, then please go ahead and also apply in round 9 so that you can be sure that you have a good chance at funding. I'll also mention that round 8 has a unique application list and a unique application portal, and you can find that on our FAQs on our website. Next slide, please. We're going to turn now to Lucy to say, Lucy, do we have any questions that we would want to stop and answer for current applicants?
We do have a few, and I know we want to get to eligibility for new applicants, so just want to take a couple. If this is actually a question for new applicants, if an arts organization is applying in round 8 and then they apply again in round 9, do they need to specify that they're an arts and cultural institution in that round 9 application?
There isn't really an opportunity to do that, but if we're going to cover what your NAICS code is in a few minutes, and that doesn't change. So Lendustry will already know what type of organization you are by the code that you supply. And round 9 is a general application round, so there's not a particular advantage in round 9 for arts and cultural organizations as there is in round 8.
Can you just briefly explain the difference between the PPP and shuttered venues programs, which are federal programs, and this state relief program? People want to know, is this a grant? Is it a loan? If they got one of those federal grants, maybe you want to cover that later, but are they eligible for this state one?
We're going to cover that more in depth when we look at the application, but it's a great question because there are a lot of programs out there. So to review, the PPP and the EIDL are federal programs. The program that we're talking about today is a state program, and so the programs are unrelated. PPP and shuttered venues are not related to this program. You can apply and get funding from both of those. And then some people may have local programs from your county or city, and those are separate from this program as well.
Okay, and then one person said that they have applied and never heard anything from Lendustry. It sounds like what they should do is log back in if they still have their information for that to find out. But are there other things that they should do?
They should start by, you're absolutely right, Lucy. They should start by logging into the application. And if you don't remember how to do that, please see the FAQs on our website. They will take you step by step how to log back into your application. And check your status message. And if you see something that you don't understand, feel free to get in contact with me.
And then if a person has been trying to log in but unable to, it just spins, what should they do?
That would be a time you'd want to contact Lendustry. I'll note that we can answer questions, but we at CalNonprofits don't have access to the Lendustry system. So we can't look up your application for you. If you absolutely just can't get in there, you need to contact Lendustry directly. And we'll post that phone number later on in the webinar.
Let's keep going, Sue. There are a lot of eligibility questions, and I know you want to get to that information.
All right. Thank you, Lucy. Next slide, please. The first question I always get is, how much can I apply for? And so this grant is very different from traditional grant programs. And one of those ways is that the grant amounts are preset, and it is determined by your 2019 gross income as you reported it on your 990. And we can see that if that gross income fell between 1,000, which is the minimum, you have to be showing income from 2019. If it fell between 1,000 and 100,000, you can get a grant of $5,000. Between 100,000 and 1 million, you can get a grant of $15,000. And between 1 million and 2.5 million, you can get a grant of $25,000. The only exception to that is for round 8 arts and cultural applicants, where there is no maximum income to qualify. So there is no income cap. If you're over 2.5 million, you can still qualify if you meet the other qualifications in round 8. Next slide, please. And we'll mention also that this is a grant and not a loan. It does not need to be paid back. So looking at the general eligibility, this program is available to organizations that are organized as 501c3, C6, or C19, meaning they are corporations, unincorporated associations, or cooperatives. You have to have your 990 from 2019 available. You do not have to have it at the time of application if you're on an extension, but we don't know yet what the last day to be able to submit that will be. So if you are working on getting your 990 completed, please note that you need to have that for a successful application from 2019. We just reviewed the revenue categories and the grant amounts. And you additionally have to be in operation on or before June 1st, 2019. That means that you had to be performing your programs or services on or before that date. If you filed your incorporation and your 501c3 after that date, you can still qualify as long as those documents are current at the time of application. You have to have a physical address in California. You have to be still open or have a clear plan for how you will reopen once conditions allow you to do that. And you had to have at least $1 in eligible expenses in the period of March 1st to December 31st, 2020. And I'm going to talk about eligible expenses for just a moment. This is another place where this grant program is a little different than what we're used to looking at, because the grant amounts are fixed, as we just saw. And it's not a one-to-one relationship with your expenses. However, you do have to have eligible expenses. And those are some of the basic things that most organizations are paying in terms of occupancy, things like rent or mortgage, insurance, other items like payroll, program supplies, and in particular, if you had to make any extra expenditures in order to be able to continue to operate in the COVID environment, things like personal protective equipment or plexiglass, et cetera, or even equipment, which is often not covered in many grant applications. But if you needed equipment to continue to operate in the COVID environment, that is an eligible expense. And again, please refer to our FAQs for more information on that. They're designed so that you can fill out this application in under an hour if you've got all your information and documents together in advance. I'll also note that this program is intended to support small businesses and nonprofit organizations that were impacted by COVID. It is not a general support program for nonprofits, and it is not for startups. So if you're a brand new organization that didn't get started till after June 1st, 2019, unfortunately, that would not be eligible. One of the nice things about this application is that you don't have to write a narrative. You're not competing in the program on the merits of your services or programs. You are simply trying to establish your eligibility. And excuse me, you also don't have to have employees. All volunteer organizations are eligible to apply. And I want to stop for a moment and just make a note about what I said earlier about needing a 990 tax form available. from 2019. If you are a smaller organization and you file the postcard, you need some additional documentation in addition to that. The reason is that the postcard doesn't list your gross revenue. And as we saw, that's how the grant amount you're eligible for will be determined. And so you need to provide some additional documentation that is covered in our FAQs as well. It's not difficult to get. So next slide, please. We talked about who's eligible. We'll talk about who's not eligible. Departments of other organizations. So let's say that you are a department of a university, for example. Unfortunately, that would not be eligible because you're not separately incorporated, nor do you file an independent 990. Likewise for fiscally sponsored organizations, unfortunately. And religious institutions have some particular rules. Some may be eligible and some may not be eligible. So we advise those organizations to please take a look at our FAQs to determine your eligibility.
Sue, can I jump in with a quick question?
Certainly.
We have a question in the Q&A box from an organization that was fiscally sponsored in 2019, but is now an independent 501c3. Can they apply? Are they eligible?
They can. And what you would want to have handy is any documentation to show that you are providing your services and programs on or before June 1st, 2019. And you'd want to have currently available articles of incorporation as filed with the state of California, as well as a 2019 tax form 990. That is really the issue there. If you don't have that 990 for your own organization, you can't use the fiscal sponsors. And if you have that available, then you would be eligible to apply, as well as having your current 501c3 federal tax exemption.
And I know there's a lot more information in our FAQ about religious organizations, but for those that offer services and programs to a broad range of people, are they potentially eligible, like a food pantry or tutoring programs?
So we have gotten some recent guidance from Lendistry on that are looking particularly at schools and childcare and educational programs provided by religious institutions as eligible. We've asked for some clarification for homeless service providers, food pantries, et cetera. We have not received that yet. But the general rule would be that if the organization is separately incorporated from the religious institution and has its own 501c3, files its own 990, then that's clear that that organization can qualify. Just because you might be affiliated with a religious organization doesn't disqualify you or doesn't define you as a religious institution. If you are, say, a congregation who might provide homeless services, for example, you would have to have at least 51% of your budget devoted to the social services as opposed to the religious activities of the congregation in order to be able to qualify. And again, there's more information on the FAQs.
Great, thank you. And we have a question about organizations that have a lot of in-kind donations that pass through even in the same day, but those in-kind donations put them over the 2.5 million for the non-arts and cultural institution nonprofits. Are they eligible to apply?
Unfortunately, they will look at your gross revenue from your 990 or if you file the postcard from the alternative documentation that you supply. You cannot back out things like in-kind donations or capital campaign gifts or endowment gifts. So I'm sorry to say we raised that with Lendistry and we did not get that approved.
And then just one more question for now. In completing the application, does it matter who completes the application? We have some concerns about whether it has to be somebody whose name is on the 990. Does it have to be a principal officer, a treasurer? You know, who needs to complete the application? Nonprofit
organizations file something with the excuse me, with the Secretary of State's office in California called a Statement of Information. And on it, you list the principals in your organization, and you also list your agent per service. The person who is the named applicant needs to appear on your Statement of Information. And if you need to update yours, it is fast and easy to do that. The information is in the FAQs, but Lendistry will not accept applications where they cannot verify that that person is actually associated with your organization. And that's how they do it, is by consulting the Statement of Information on file with the state of California.
So just a quick follow-up, is it better then to update that form rather than to reapply in round nine?
That would be a choice the organization has to make. We can't advise people as to who they would want to list on their Statement of Information. But that is an option. If your applicant is not on your Statement of Information, you could either file a change request with Lendistry. If you need to change your applicant name, and again, that's addressed in our FAQs, and or you could go ahead and update your Statement of Information depending on what your internal policies and procedures permit you to do.
And just a quick clarification on the fiscal sponsor who has transitioned now to being an independent 501c3. They don't have their own 990. So for 2019.
I'm sorry to say that would not qualify. That is, Lendistry is making no exceptions to the requirement for a 990 from 2019.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you, Lucy.
Later. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to our next slide. We're talking still about eligibility. And so, and we just covered that we just talked about the applicant's name must be on the Statement of Information and that you must have filed a 2019 Form 990. So let's go on to the next slide. As you begin an application, it's vitally important that you are using Google Chrome as your browser. The Lendistry platform was built using Google Chrome technology, and if you try to use a different browser like Safari or Firefox, you're likely to encounter errors and be unable to continue your application. And there are lots more tech tips on our FAQs, so we encourage everybody to read through that so that you don't get frustrated while you're filling out the application. Next slide, please. So now it's time for us to talk about how do you start thinking of preparing to fill out your application. And the first is to gather your documents. We mentioned the 2019 Form 90, your articles of incorporation, your government issued ID for the applicant. So they are requiring a photo ID issued by a unit of government, like a driver's license or passport, that you provide along with your documents in the application, and something called the application certification form. You can get a link to the application certification form on in our FAQs as well. So that's something that you would download and fill out on your computer, or print out and fill out by hand and scan and upload back to your application when it comes time to supply your documents. Also, if applicable, if you need, if you're a postcard filer, a 990 postcard filer, and you need additional documentation to show your gross income from 2019, you can use the RRF1 form that nonprofits file with the state. And again, there's a link and information about that in our FAQs, or other income documentation like a financial report. The other things, if you have available a certificate of organization, a fictitious name registration, which is also known as a DBA, or government issued business license, those are all documents that you can supply as well. Next slide, please. We talked about that gross revenue. So you want to have that figure available from your 990 or from an alternate source for postcard filers about what your gross revenue it was in 2019. We'll make a note here that you'll be asked further along for your gross for some for some of your revenue data from 2020 as well. So what this program does is it takes a look at how you were COVID impacted. So it's going to ask you to provide gross revenue figures from a 6-month period in 2019 and from the comparable 6-month period in 2020 as well. Most people are showing a drop in revenue as they've been COVID impacted. When you go to calculate that, do not include any COVID relief funds you might have received from government sources. So we spoke about that a little earlier, like PPP or EIDL or state or, or county or local municipal funding, because there's a separate question for that on the application. So again, the figures that you need are your gross revenue for 2019 and your revenue from April 1st to September 30th in 2019, the same time period in 2020, less any COVID relief that you received from government sources. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through the application itself. Next slide, please. So in order to start your application, you heard us use the term application funder a little bit earlier, application partner a little bit earlier. And CalNonprofits is an application partner, but there are about 35 others, and you are free to choose any application partner that you like. And as Jan mentioned earlier, we're here to assist you, regardless of who your partner is, if you're a nonprofit organization. So if you'd like to see a list of all of those partners, you can go to careliefgrant.com. If you'd like to jump directly to starting an application with CalNonprofits as your partner, that is the link there, calnonprofits.mylindustry.com. You don't need to write either of those down. Again, it's in our FAQs. Please note that if you are applying in round 8, that is a different application link. The arts and cultural applications have their own application link, and that's listed in our FAQs. And it's important once you select a partner that you remember which partner you selected. Every partner has a unique application portal, and you're going to need to know what portal you went through first to file your application in order to be able to return to that portal to check on your application later on. So you might want to bookmark or write down that login link that you use to get to your application. Next slide, please. And when you get to the application, this is the screen that you will see. If you are a new applicant, disregard the what's appearing on the right. If you're a current applicant, that's where you go to log back into your application. To start an application, you want to click on that button that says click here to apply. Next slide, please. And then if you are a nonprofit organization, you want to be sure that you are selecting the nonprofit application. Every portal has both the small business and the nonprofit application available. So you want to make sure that you're selecting that black bar that says Grant Program for Nonprofits. Next slide, please. The application features some accessibility and language features. And so you'll see these two buttons as you begin your application, and the accessibility button will repeat on every page of the application so that if you need any special assistance or to view the application in a different language, you can do that. And we just learned this morning that the additional languages have been added. So what you see on the screen here is not an exhaustive list. Next slide, please. So now we'll go on to page 1 of the application, and you can see at the top right that red arrow is pointing toward something that says watch video. And there you can, once you get into the application, you can watch a video on how to fill it out. And then the other thing that we'll stop and note is that this application was originally designed for small business use. There are going to be questions that are atypical for nonprofit organizations, and there are going to be some that frankly just don't make a lot of sense for us. All of those are addressed in our FAQs, and we're going to touch on a few of those today so that you can get through the application quickly and easily. In the bottom middle there, you'll see another red arrow that is pointing to a question that says, please tell us your percentage of ownership. And the answer to that is 0. We all know that nonprofits don't have owners. Lendistry knows that nonprofits don't have owners. And so I encourage everybody, if a question doesn't make sense to you, don't linger on it or overthink it. Fill in what you need to so that you can move through the application, and know that Lendistry knows that nonprofit organizations don't fit neatly into some of the questions or some of the drop-down menus. There will be places where you'll get drop-down menus and you just have to choose what's closest or something so that you can continue to move through the application.
Sue, can I jump in here just for a sec?
Sure.
We have some questions, just concerns and questions about CEO's personal Social Security number and date of birth having.
I was just going to mention that.
Are you okay?
So,
great. Okay, thank you.
Great minds think alike, Lucy. And so I mentioned that there are things that are atypical for nonprofit organizations in applying for funding. And one of those is that this application does request the applicant's Social Security number and date of birth. And that is unusual for nonprofits. In some cases, it's uncomfortable, but it is required. And the reason that it's required is that Lendistry is doing some pretty vigorous fraud prevention in the program, and they are verifying identities of applicants using that information. Next slide, please.
Can you just say again what people should put in the owner name?
The owner name is the applicant. Thank you. The owner name is the applicant. Again, don't worry about it. Lendistry knows nonprofits don't have owners.
Right.
As you move to the next page of the application, where that red arrow is pointing to a drop-down menu that you'll see that will ask you, are you providing services under one of the 4 priority areas? The priority areas are emergency food, emergency housing, childcare, and workforce development. And you can still qualify if your answer is no. So please don't abandon an application because you don't fall under one of the 4 priority areas. Continue and finish, because that's not required to qualify. Next slide, please. One of the other questions that typically confuses people is you'll be asked to provide your number of full and part-time employees. And please don't count your contractors in there. Anybody who is working on a contract basis is eligible to apply on their own to the program. So you might want to let them know about that. And then you're asked about jobs retained and jobs created in 2020. Jobs retained is the number of employees on 12/31/2020. So at the end of the year, I'm sorry, jobs retained, the number of employees on December 31st, 2020. And for jobs created, if you created any new jobs, or if you had employees who were laid off or furloughed and then recalled during 2020, that's what that question is asking for. Next slide, please. And we've already covered grant amounts, so we'll go on to the next one. Here again, a couple of tips on answering some of the questions here. On the top left, that red arrow is pointing to a question that says, who is your customer base? Are you B2B or B2C? And that stands for, are you business to business or business to consumer? Most nonprofits are business to consumer, so you would choose B2C. On the right-hand side, those 2 arrows are pointing to questions where we've selected an answer of unknown. And that's an example of where the drop-down menu offerings may not apply to you. It is perfectly okay to select answers like unknown or no, and that does not disqualify you or disadvantage your application. And then going over to that second arrow on the left is pointing to the question about your NAICS code. We mentioned that moments ago. NAICS stands for the North American Industry Classification System. And many larger nonprofits include their NAICS code on a schedule on their 990. Not everyone has that. And if you need to find your NAICS code, then you can look to the right where it says click here to find your NAICS code, which allows you to search through the through an awful lot of codes and select your own. If that's daunting for you, in our FAQs, we refer people to the US Census Bureau, which has a service called Dr. Nasis. And I understand that they're very responsive in a timely manner, either by phone or by email, and you can talk to them or write them and tell them what you do, and they will help you select your code. Next slide, please. As we get toward the finishing line on this application, that first arrow points to, you will see a restatement of the question related to the 4 priority areas. Again, you can say no, it doesn't disadvantage you. And then we move down to that middle arrow, which is where you enter that financial information that I mentioned earlier. That's those 2 6-month periods from 2019 and 2020 for your gross revenue. And then that third arrow is pointing to where you enter any other government COVID relief that you have received. One note about this is that some people have received multiple COVID relief grants from government sources. There's nothing wrong with that. But there aren't enough spaces in the application to list them all. So if you don't have enough space in the application to list them all, then what you should enter is the total amount that you received, and then make a Word document that lists your grant awards and amounts and upload that with your other documents. Next slide, please. You'll know you're getting toward the end because you will see a pop-up that looks like this. And you have a couple of choices here. If you want to go back and review your information, or you're not done entering it, you can always hit save and continue later and then log back into your application using the right portal link and until you've completed your application. Every question on the application has to have an answer. And please note that once you submit your application, you can't go back and take a look at it again. You also are not given an opportunity to print out what you filled in the application. So if you'd like to save a record of your work, you need to take screenshots as you go along. This red arrow is pointing to a line that when you are done filling out your application, you'll be asked to type the word yes. And then next slide, you hit submit. Once you've typed yes and hit submit, you cannot return to look at what you entered into the application, and you cannot alter your answers. If you do need to change something, you realize later on, oh, I didn't answer something correctly, or I wish I'd chosen something else. That's addressed in our FAQs. So if you need to alter your application, please consult the FAQs. And I'll also mention that this brings you to the end of part 1. Part 1 is all you need to submit for an on-time application. Once you've done that, you will still need to go back and upload your documents, but that doesn't need to be done by the application deadline for the round. Once you have filled in your name and email address, you'll receive an email from Lendistry that has a temporary password and invites you back to create your own password. So save that email that has the link that you can return to your application to finish it or to upload your documents. Next, and then the last step will be uploading your documents. If you are missing something, Lendistry will contact you during their application review. But if you can upload your documents in advance, it helps them process your application more quickly. And now we'll turn to Lucy again for more questions. And next slide, please, Henry.
Thank you, Sue. So we have a nonprofit asking, they have a new name, but all of their documentation essentially is in the old name. So let me ask this correctly here, looking at them.
I think I follow the question.
Did you? Okay, great.
That is something that would cause your application to be flagged. So what I would suggest that you do is write a very brief 1-2 sentence explanation on a Word document and upload that with your other documents. If you have any documentation on the name change, you can include that as well.
Okay. And then can you just let folks know, for all volunteer organizations, are they eligible to apply, even if 0 jobs have been created and they're going to put 0 in that part of the application? Right.
It's important to remember that some questions in the application are just data gathering. So no, you don't have to have employees. You don't have to have created jobs. all volunteer organizations are absolutely eligible to apply.
Okay. Can an organization have multiple NACES codes, or is there just one?
I have a difference of opinion with Lendistry on this because we know that many nonprofits are multi. If you're a multi-service nonprofit, you could be engaged in very different activities. Lendistry requires that you choose one. You can, so there's no place on the application to enter multiple NACES codes. You need to choose one for your largest program.
Okay, and then we have a couple of questions about eligibility based on annual revenue. We have organizations that did not have a drop in revenue over the 6-month period, but are anticipating additional costs. Is there anything going forward, is there anything they can do?
That does not make you ineligible. So I would say go ahead and apply.
Okay. Even if they did not have the drop in revenue in the 6-month period?
That is correct. Priority will be given to applicants who do show that, but it doesn't make you ineligible.
Okay, great. And if the income was above 2.5 million in 2019, but not in 2020, are you eligible?
I'm sorry, but they will only look at 2019 in order to determine eligibility.
Okay, let's see. Okay, I think we have gotten to most of them. Let me see. Okay, we have a question about the PO box from an arts organization that would be eligible to apply in round 8. They are based in a town where all of the addresses are PO boxes. What should they do?
Lendistry is aware of this, and this is also addressed in our FAQs. But what you should do is, if you have any access to a street address, that is preferable to a PO box. So it could be your home address or a board member or another employee, but if there is a street address, please supply that. Lendistry does not send you anything by US mail. All communication will be done via email. So, and Lendistry prefers the street address so that they can verify that there is a physical location associated with that application. It's part of their fraud prevention measures. If you absolutely don't have a street address and all you have available is a PO box, you can list that on your application, but then type out a note as to why and upload that with your other documents.
And then folks have some additional concerns about just any restrictions on the use of funds. I know you talked about expenses a bit, and also what kind of reporting requirements there are. Sure.
So, as I mentioned earlier, there is not a one-to-one relationship between your eligible expenses and your grant amount. If you have even $1 in eligible expenses in the period of March 1st to December 31st, 2020, you are eligible to apply for the grant and to receive at least the minimum amount of $5,000. Once you receive that, Lendistry and the state conceive of this as a reimbursement for expenses that you had during COVID times, but nobody needs to go back and reopen their books from 2020 or anything like that. Essentially, because it's a reimbursement, once you receive the funds, you can use them as you see fit. We do not have any information about reporting requirements. The only guidance that we have had from Lendistry is to please retain your records for 3 years, which most nonprofits would do anyway. So we're not anticipating monitoring on this program, although we can't guarantee that, but I'd be very surprised. And again, we don't have information on reporting yet, but we don't even know if there is going to be any reporting.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question from somebody who has obviously already worked on an application. There are concerns that line 12 does not show a nonprofit's gross income. Is there any other information on this? I'm not exactly...
Your gross income, okay. So it appears differently in different places depending on which form of the 990 that you file. And so it's in a different place on the 990 versus the 990 EZ, and it doesn't appear at all on the 990 postcard. I would say please check out our FAQs because there's a discussion about that there. And that will show you exactly where to find your gross income and also what other documentation you need if you file the 990 postcard.
Okay, great. And I know we're running out of time here. One more question. Is there anything you can say about how determinations are made about who gets an award? And then related to that, if the head of the organization is not a person of color, but the rest of the staff are, is there anything they can do, or is that going to be taken into consideration in their application?
Sure. So I'll take the second one first, which is that the demographics questions that you're asked to answer, our guidance is to fill that out either for the applicant or for the senior management team. So I'll leave that to the applicant to choose what they would like to do. And then the question comes up about how are applications selected and prioritized. We don't have a lot of information on this. We do know that there is an algorithm and that all applications, both new applications and those on the waiting list, are considered in every round. This is not a first come, first serve program. Anyone who applies in a given round or who is on the waiting list is eligible for consideration in that round. And I'll mention also that round 9 we know is open September 9th through the 30th. There's no reason to rush to put your application in on September 9th. Even if you as long as you get it in by 5 p.m. on September 30th, it receives the same consideration as all other applications. And sometimes the Lendistry slate is a little slower or even has some glitches when there's high volume of traffic. So I often advise people to wait a day or two after the cycle opens.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And I'll mention that if your question wasn't addressed today, to please feel free to get in contact with me. Next slide, Henry. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jan.
Thanks so much, Sue and Lucy. You guys know everything, so it's great that you did. I want to just underline one last thing that Sue said, which is, we had hundreds of questions in the pre-submitted ones as well as today, so we know we didn't get to them all. So you can contact Sue, and she'll be sure to be able to get back to you with your specific question if you didn't hear it answered today. So thanks, everybody. As a reminder, the last date to apply for round 9, which is the last round, is September 30th. So you have 29 days to work on it. And hopefully thousands more nonprofits will get grants as a result of this program. And good luck to everybody. Have a good rest of your day and a great lunch. Bye.